There comes a moment that doesn't announce itself, a quiet rupture inside the soul. Not a dramatic breakdown, not a rush of tears, not rage or sorrow, but something far more haunting. It's the moment when your spirit, tired, weathered, and unheard, finally whispers, enough. Enough of performing for love. Enough of bending to belong. Enough of swallowing your truth just to keep the peace in a room that was never built to hold your fire. And the world doesn't stop when it happens. The sun rises, people laugh, deadlines loom, but inside you, everything has shifted. You feel it in your chest before you can name it. A weight that's lived there for years suddenly becomes too heavy. It's not one event. It's the 1,000 tiny betrayals of self you tolerated just to be accepted. It's the smile you forced when your heart was screaming. The apologies you gave when someone else crossed your line. And somewhere in that quiet breaking, something sacred stirs. Carl Jung called it individuation, the slow death of who you were told to be, and the rebirth of who you really are. There is no warning, no flash of lightning, just a stillness, a tiredness, a moment where you can no longer lie to yourself. You realize the life you built is one you never truly chose, and that realization terrifies you because it means letting go. Letting go of roles, of comfort, of people who never saw you fully. And for a moment you hesitate. You wonder if maybe you're asking for too much. Maybe if you just try harder, smile more, shrink a little quieter, things will change. But they never do, not in the way you need. And so without fanfare, the decision happens. A decision not born from anger, but from clarity, from love. Love for the parts of you that have gone unheard. Love for the future self who refuses to live in a cage. And once that choice is made, there is no returning. You can't go back to pretending. You can't unsee what you've seen. The person you once were begins to dissolve, not because they were wrong or weak, but because they've completed their purpose. They carried you this far, but now it's time for someone new to rise. People may not understand. They may call it selfish, dramatic, impulsive, but what they don't see is that walking away is not about giving up. It's about finally showing up for yourself. And that is the real beginning, the birth of someone who no longer lives in reaction to the world, but in deep response to their own soul. Still, the path forward isn't easy, because before you become whole, you must face everything you've buried, the shadow, the side of you were taught to silence, your grief, your rage, your wildness, your needs. You thought they made you unlovable, so you buried them. But the shadow doesn't die in the dark. It waits. It leaks. It repeats itself in every wound you ignore. It lives in the people you attract, the patterns you swear you're done with, the dreams you never chase. To become who you're meant to be, you must meet the parts of yourself you've been most afraid of. You must learn to hold them without shame. You must tell the story differently. Not, this is just how life is, but I get to choose how I live. Not, what if I end up alone, but what if I finally find peace within myself? Because you were never meant to live asleep. You were meant to awaken, to unbecome everything that was never yours. And in that awakening, you don't just find freedom, you find yourself. And here's the part most people never prepare for. The moment when you say no more isn't just a boundary, it's a burial. You're not just leaving behind a situation or person. You're letting go of a version of yourself that once felt necessary for survival. That version wore the mask. That version knew how to please, how to stay quiet, how to stay small just to feel safe. But now that safety feels like a prison, and stepping out of it feels like death. It hurts, not because you're weak, but because you're grieving. You're grieving the you who got you this far, the one who tolerated what she shouldn't have, who believed she had to earn love, who dimmed her light to make others feel comfortable. That self isn't the enemy. She was your protection, your armor. But now she's become the weight you must lay down if you want to fly. And as you lay her down, fear creeps in. Doubt seeps through. Did you make a mistake? Were you too harsh? Should you have stayed longer, tried harder, been softer? That panic isn't failure. It's the unconscious reacting, trying to drag you back into the comfort of the known. It doesn't care if that comfort was killing your spirit. It only knows it's familiar. But the soul is fierce. The soul doesn't want familiar. It wants truth. And truth comes with disruption. So the battle begins. The old clinging for survival, the new aching to breathe. And if you can just hold on through the tremors, through the echo of your old patterns calling you back, something starts to shift. Energy returns. You feel pieces of yourself you forgot existed. You're no longer drained from constantly managing other people's comfort. You're no longer censoring your words, monitoring your tone, questioning your right to feel. You begin to walk into rooms differently, not louder, not bolder, but truer, more whole. And people notice, not because you become someone new, but because you've stopped hiding who you are. Jung called it a psychic rebirth, and it feels exactly like that. The heaviness lifts, not all at once, but slowly, like the first breath after being underwater. The things that used to haunt you lose their grip. What once defined you no longer fits. And you realize that all the strength you were searching for out there was always buried inside, waiting for you to come home to it. And here's the most beautiful, terrifying truth. The love that arises from this process is like nothing you've ever known. It's not performative. It doesn't ask for permission. It's not the kind you beg for. It's rooted, ancient, fierce. It comes from looking in the mirror, truly looking, and seeing someone worthy, not because they are perfect, but because they are real. That kind of love doesn't chase. It doesn't settle. It doesn't trade authenticity for approval. It stands. It radiates. It reclaims. And when you taste it, you can never go back. Because for the first time, you're not waiting to be chosen. You've chosen yourself. That's when the world begins to mirror your shift. Not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you've become a living match for the life that was always meant to find you. New connections emerge. Old ones fade. Doors open where you thought only walls existed. Not because you forced it, but because you finally aligned with it. But here's the part no one talks about. Once you awaken that kind of love inside yourself, you have to protect it. Something shifts the moment you finally say, no more. Not just in your decisions, but in your very perception of reality. Suddenly, the things you once tolerated, those subtle, disrespectful words, the half-hearted apologies, the patterns that quietly broke your spirit, now feel impossible to unsee. It's as if your soul has opened its eyes for the first time. You wake up, and in that waking, the world looks different. You used to make excuses for them. You told yourself they were just going through something, that maybe you were too sensitive, that love means being patient, endlessly understanding, constantly bending. You thought that if you could just be enough of everything, they would finally change. They would finally see you. But now you understand the truth you were never taught. It was never your job to rescue anyone from themselves. Love cannot grow in a place where accountability doesn't exist. And no matter how much you pour into someone, they will never become whole if they refuse to face their own shadow. Jung warned us about this, that those who haven't met their darkness will project it onto others, turning lovers into scapegoats, partners into punching bags, companions into caretakers. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that projection, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you didn't yet know your worth. But now you do. Now you can see it clearly, not just the truth about others, but the truth about yourself. That your love is not a tool to fix. It is a force that deserves to be met. And when you finally withdraw that force from those who abuse it, the mask falls. They show you who they truly are. And often it's ugly. The anger, the blame, the twisted guilt trips dressed as concern. You've changed, they'll say. And for once, it's not an accusation. It's a fact. Yes, you have changed. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself for peace. You are no longer scared of silence, of being alone, of losing what was only holding you back. You understand now that self-love is not some soft, poetic thing. It's a discipline. It's a decision you make in every moment not to betray yourself again. And it doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't need to be loud. It's quiet, steady, sacred. But make no mistake, this path comes with a cost. When you release what doesn't serve you, you create space. And that space, it feels like emptiness at first, like loneliness, like doubt. You wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. You question whether you're hard to love. You ache for the familiar, even when that familiar was slowly killing you. That's the moment where most people turn back. They choose the pain they know over the unknown they fear. But transformation doesn't happen in comfort. It's born in the chaos between who you were and who you're becoming. It's forged in the fires of solitude, in the long nights where no one is clapping, where no one understands, where you only have your own breath and the raw ache of truth. That's where your foundation is built. And if you can stay there, if you can stand in that silence without rushing to fill it, clarity arrives. Not as a flash, not as a grand epiphany, but as a slow unfolding, a strength that grows from the inside out, a knowing that doesn't waver. That's when you realize you're not waiting for better, you're becoming better. And everything that's meant for you is finding its way, not because you chased it, but because you finally made space for it. There will be nights when you miss what nearly destroyed you, not because you want it back, but because your mind hasn't yet caught up with your freedom. That's what no one tells you. Freedom can feel like grief, like standing in an open field after living your whole life in a locked room. You don't know what to do with the silence, with the vastness, with the absence of pain you once mistook for purpose. And nostalgia, it creeps in like a whisper, not to remind you of love, but to test your strength, to ask, are you sure you're ready to live without the cage? And deep down you know, you could never go back. Not because the door's locked, but because the person who once lived behind it no longer exists. And it's in that quiet, in that sacred space between who you were and who you're becoming, that something incredible begins to unfold. Without trying, without effort, you start attracting differently. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's resonance. You've changed the signal you send out, and the world can't help but respond. Carl Jung once said that our outer world is a mirror of our inner state. When you were doubting your worth, you drew in people who confirmed that doubt. When you accepted crumbs, you received more of the same. Not because that's all the world had to offer, but because that's what you believed you deserved. But now you vibrate with truth, with boundaries, with self-respect that doesn't need to be explained. And suddenly the people who once felt like home now feel like noise. The situations that once seemed tolerable now taste bitter on your tongue. You're not cold. You're not hard. You're simply no longer willing to live beneath your own standard. And this is where many stumble. They feel the shift. They feel the loneliness. And they confuse it with wrongness. They mistake the shedding for regression. But growth isn't linear. Healing isn't clean. You will have days where you question everything, where your heart aches for the comfort of the familiar, even if that comfort came wrapped in pain. But don't let that doubt deceive you. This is not a return. This is a deepening. The pain you feel isn't punishment. It's preparation. It's your soul stretching into spaces it was never allowed to touch before. And that ache is the proof that you are no longer numb. Jung warned that the greatest barrier to self-discovery is the fear of emptiness. And he was right. That silence, that stillness, it terrifies us. We were raised to believe that empty meant broken, that being alone meant being abandoned. But the truth is that emptiness is sacred. It is not a void. It is a beginning. And if you can resist the urge to fill it too quickly, if you can sit in that quiet with courage, something begins to grow in the stillness. Clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from books or advice or validation, but from being with yourself long enough to hear your own voice again, to feel your own rhythm, to know your own worth without someone else having to reflect it back to you. And once that happens, once you've tasted the strength that comes from within, you no longer beg for love. You no longer chase what doesn't see you. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You simply stand, whole, rooted, enough. And life, finally, meets you there. You no longer move through life trying to prove you're enough. You already know you are. You're not reaching out from desperation or waiting to be chosen. You're rooted, full, alive. What once felt like a void now feels like sacred space. like the open sky after a storm has passed. You're no longer acting from scarcity, you're living from abundance. You're no longer asking for scraps of affection. You've become the source of love itself, and this changes everything. Jung called it synchronicity, the mysterious alignment of inner truth without a reality. And when you find that truth, when you stop searching for your worth outside of yourself, synchronicity begins to shape your path. The right people show up, not because you're looking for them, but because they are drawn to the version of you that finally sees herself. The answers come without force. The opportunities feel natural. Everything starts to flow, and something even greater happens. You lose your fear, not because the world becomes easier, but because you are no longer a stranger to yourself. You've walked through the fire, you've sat in your emptiness, you've stopped running, and now your power is unshakable. You're not interested in performance. You don't need applause. You're not desperate to be seen because you've already seen yourself. That's when the transformation cements. You no longer prove, you simply live. You no longer wait for permission, you give it to yourself. You stop trying to be understood by people who only ever wanted the version of you that needed them. And yes, some of those people will come back, not because they've grown, but because they feel their grip on you has been lost. And it has. Where they once controlled your emotions, now they find silence. Where their words once pierced, now they bounce off. Not because you hate them, but because they can no longer access you. You've risen above the level where their power lived. You don't need to scream. You don't need to defend. You don't even need to be seen. You simply walk forward, centered, clear, and untouched. You've stepped into your truth. And once that happens, there is no going back. The struggle that once defined your life becomes the soil from which your peace grows. You no longer live by old wounds. You no longer accept less than your worth. You don't participate in cycles that once broke you. You consciously choose every day what you allow into your life. Not out of fear, but out of knowing. Knowing that everything you allow is a reflection of your self-respect. That's the true victory. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet revolution. A shift so deep that even the universe adjusts. You are no longer surviving. You are creating. Now you finally know. Not in theory, not as something you hope to believe one day, but deep in your bones, in your breath, in every quiet moment where you stand alone and feel your own presence. You know your worth. And that changes everything. This is self-love, not the glossy kind sold in quotes and surface rituals, but the raw, rooted kind. The kind that says, I will never again abandon myself just to belong. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that simply doesn't settle. Because now you understand, it was never about being perfect. It was about finally deciding that your peace matters more than someone else's comfort. And when you reach this point, life presents you with a choice. The same choice it always has. Stay asleep in the roles others wrote for you, or wake up and live your truth, even if it scares you. Even if it means walking away from everything you once called home. When you finally say no more, it's like breaking a spell. You see the illusions for what they were. Relationships that drained you, love that came with conditions, the false narratives that told you to wait, to fix, to prove, to endure. And suddenly the weight you thought you had to carry just slips away. Not because the world has changed, but because you no longer pretend you can't feel what you feel. And yes, it's disorienting at first. You're used to the struggle. You've been trained to find strength in suffering, to wait patiently for things to improve while sacrificing your own voice. But now, you see through all of it. You hear your own intuition loud and clear, and it won't let you betray yourself again. That makes you different. Not harder, not colder, just honest, grounded. Unavailable for anything less than truth. People from your past might say you've changed, and they're right. You're no longer emotionally accessible to the dynamics that once broke you. You don't beg for love. You don't argue to be understood. You don't chase what runs. Because now you understand that your energy is sacred, and wherever you place it, it grows. Jung was right. When you suppress your truth, it doesn't disappear. It turns into anxiety, disconnection, illness, dreams that haunt you, patterns that repeat. It keeps knocking until you finally listen, until you finally turn inward and ask yourself the question you spent years avoiding. What if nothing is wrong with me? What if I've just been silencing the part of me that always knew, and now you've answered it? You've listened. You've honored it. Now you trust yourself. That's the foundation, not confidence, not validation, trust. That what you feel is real, that your needs are valid, that love without respect is not love, that peace is not earned by suffering, that silence doesn't mean weakness. And from that trust comes the most effortless kind of strength, the kind that doesn't explain itself. And life in turn shifts. You don't have to chase. You don't have to fight. The people who once fed off your uncertainty begin to disappear. Not because you force them out, but because your new energy makes their games irrelevant. When your self-worth rises, exploitation has no place to land. You don't push them away. You simply rise so high that they no longer recognize the version of you they once manipulated. You stop being a source of supply for people who only knew how to take. You stop being the one who overextends. You stop being the one who says yes when your soul is screaming no. And the most beautiful part? You don't have to prove anything anymore. You don't have to convince anyone of your value. You simply are. You exist in wholeness, in clarity, in quiet knowing. And that is the beginning of a life that finally belongs to you. They can try their old tricks. Guilt, silence, emotional chaos. But nothing sticks anymore. You don't flinch. You don't shrink. You don't step back into the role they once cast you in. Because that version of you, the one who tolerated confusion, who made excuses, who tried to carry what wasn't theirs, is gone. And yes, it's true. The emptiness that follows can feel unfamiliar. When you let go of toxic love, unstable connections, or relationships that fed off your uncertainty, there's a space left behind. At first, that silence can feel louder than the noise ever did. Not because you miss the pain, but because you're standing in a new space your nervous system doesn't yet know how to trust. But this is where everything shifts. In that pause, you discover what real self-love feels like. Not fireworks, not dopamine highs, not constant comfort, but quiet, grounded peace. That peace you once begged others to give you, now it lives within you. It's calm, it's still, it's real. And that changes everything. Because now you understand, your relationship with yourself sets the tone for everything else in your life. You've stopped chasing love and started being love. You've stopped explaining your worth and started embodying it. The world doesn't have to understand. And that's okay, because you're not performing anymore. You're not proving. You're just living, aligned, awake, whole. You'll still be tested. The past may knock on your door with a new disguise, trying to lure you back into old patterns with familiar words. But this time, you know the difference. You feel it in your body. You see it clearly. You don't need to wrestle with it anymore, because clarity has become your compass. You no longer need to explain why you walked away. You no longer seek closure from those who never gave you honesty. You no longer place your peace in anyone else's hands. And that kind of self-trust, it's unshakable. People may say you've changed, that you're distant now, harder to reach. And they're right. But not because you've built walls. You've built standards. You've stopped making space for chaos and started making space for peace, for joy, for things that feel like home, not survival. Your energy has shifted. The things that used to wound you now bounce off the new boundaries you've built with compassion and conviction. Manipulation doesn't land. Mixed signals don't tempt. Guilt no longer controls you. And you're not angry about it. You're just done. There's power in not reacting, in not explaining, in letting silence do the work. And as you grow more into this version of yourself, you find something surprising. You have no desire to return to what once felt like love, but was really just emotional starvation dressed in hope. You don't miss the drama. You don't miss the chasing. You don't miss the emotional guessing games. Because now you know what doesn't feel like peace isn't love. What doesn't flow isn't meant. What makes you question your worth has no place in your future. And now you stand in a place of power, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer pretend it's okay when it's not. You've chosen yourself fully, finally. You've stopped asking for permission to feel whole. You've stopped editing your truth to keep others comfortable. You no longer chase what's fading. You no longer water what doesn't grow. You no longer apologize for needing more. You've made your decision. Never again will you betray your own voice just to be heard. Never again will you shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Never again will you choose pain just to feel less alone. This is the line in the sand, and you're already on the other side. Never again will you let anyone define your worth, because now at last you understand the truth that shifts everything. Self-love isn't a destination, it's a path. One you walk with every choice, every boundary, every time you say no more and mean it. And now you are finally walking in the right direction. The war that used to rage inside of you, the tug of war between who you are and who you were told to be, it's over. There is only clarity now. The clarity that comes when you no longer wait for someone else to name your value. You already know who you are. You feel it in your bones. You carry it in your stillness. And here's where everything begins to transform, because the world, like a mirror, reflects the energy you bring to it. And now that you've reclaimed your voice, honored your needs, and released the weight that was never yours to carry, life shifts. Life listens. You start to attract what aligns, not what distracts. You move through your days with a different rhythm. It's not rushed, it's not desperate, it's deeply intentional. You no longer chase what is running. You no longer beg to be chosen. You are the choice. You finally realize the universe was never punishing you. It was waiting for you to choose yourself. You see it now. All the moments you were stuck weren't failures. They were invitations to let go, to wake up, to grow. And now you're here, standing in a version of yourself that used to feel impossible. Now when something isn't right for you, your body tells you. Your soul recognizes the misalignment before your mind tries to justify it. You don't need to argue with your intuition anymore. You trust it. You trust you. That is the real gift. Because when you change your energy, your entire reality begins to shift. The people you attract, the conversations you engage in, the opportunities that come your way. Everything starts to mirror the new frequency you're vibrating at, one of worth, clarity, and calm. You no longer entertain chaos disguised as passion. You no longer hold space for people who don't know how to hold space for you. You no longer carry guilt for outgrowing what no longer fits. Because now you know, growth requires release, and release requires courage. And this whole journey, it started with one brave decision, the decision to never again accept less than what you deserve, to no longer sacrifice your soul for the illusion of love or safety or approval. That choice changed everything. And maybe someone out there still hasn't made that choice. Maybe someone is still trapped in the very cycle you've broken free from. Maybe they're still searching for a sign, a message, a voice that says, you are allowed to let go. Let your voice be that message. Let your truth be the spark. Because transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It spreads, quietly, powerfully, from one awakened soul to another. So if these words touch something in you, don't keep them in the dark. Pass them on. Be the reason someone else realizes they are not alone in their awakening, that it's okay to walk away, that it's powerful to begin again. You've already started. You're already becoming. And now you are unstoppable.